So imagine this, you live in Western Australia, right? You live on the south coast, more than 600 kilometres from Perth, where there's been one infection of coronavirus 3 days ago from a known source in hotel quarantine. But even down there on the coast, you can't go to work, you can't go to school. Worse still, you've booked holidays to head east and visit relatives interstate, but you can't go now. You can't leave your home, and the South Australian border is blocked anyway. This is all because one person picked up an infection, a disease that the overwhelming majority of people either don't get any symptoms from or only suffer a mild illness. And this person and the source of the infection are more than 6 hours drive away from you across farmland and mallee and scrub. And your life is on hold. Who knows when you'll get to make that visit interstate to see family now? It's nuts, of course. You couldn't make up this sort of nonsense. If they tried this in an episode of Utopia or Yes Minister, it'd ruin the series because it's just too implausible. But that's just one real-life example of how the WA lockdown is actually playing out. What about this one? A couple are getting married this Friday afternoon in the Southern Highlands of New South Wales. The groom's family has already flown into the area. They came into Sydney the other day, but they arrived after the WA lockdown was declared. So they've been forced to isolate in their hotel until Friday night, after the wedding. They're sitting in their hotel, 10 minutes away from the wedding venue, but unless sanity prevails, they'll miss it. And get this is despite the fact they've tested negative for COVID-19. And despite the fact that they're going to be free to leave that hotel, even under these onerous, over-the-top nanny state rules, they're going to be free to leave their hotel just 6 hours later, 6 hours after the wedding. This is cruel, it's heartless, it's unjustified, it's stupid. It's their son's wedding. What is the risk to the people of New South Wales? What is the proportionate response? We have deliberately turned ourselves from the lucky country and the clever country into the stupid country. We're scared, frightened, paranoid and idiotic. It's embarrassing. But all the evidence now is that most of the population is happy to defer to politicians making these decisions because they defer to the medical advice alone. You don't need a medical degree to understand how to stop infections, but what you do need as a politician is the judgment to understand the costs and benefits, the risks and proportionate responses, how to find the balance between minimising the effects of a new virus and still maintaining a viable community, society and economy. But the fear-mongering approach of the states, the lockdown mentality, is so popular that even the opposition parties are too weak to rail against it. Western Australia's Labor Premier, Mark McGowan, announced today that there was another day without any new infections in his state. 3 days since they found one infected worker, 2 days into lockdown and no infections, demonstrating yet again that they've overreacted. What a threshold, hey? One infection locked the state down. What would they do if they had 100 infections? Confine everyone to their bathrooms? It is a joke, a sick joke and a sad joke. But even just weeks out from the state election in the West, the Western Australian opposition leader won't criticise the lockdown, won't campaign against it. Zac Kirkup, who's the new Liberal leader there, he turned up today in his face mask and he promised to support all the measures of the government. He just criticised Labor for letting the disease in and allowing hotel quarantine staff to have second jobs, and he demanded a 24-hour testing centre too.
We do not have time to wait. We've seen what happens here in WA when complacency occurs. When we wait days or weeks for implementation, we should have this now. We should have listened to what happened in Victoria. We will work with the government however we can, as constructively as possible, to make sure we get those recommendations implemented.
Mate. There is no point running in politics unless you stand for something. Being supportive of WA Labor and their drastic lockdown, just nitpicking Mark McGowan over this or that, won't cut it. Think about what is sensible here, what makes sense. And there's a fair bet, whatever the polls say, if it makes sense, there's a fair bet people will support you. And locking down a state for one case is self-evidently unwarranted, unjustified and unsustainable. They're going to do this again next time? So someone should say so. But instead, good old parochialism wins out, and Zac Kirkup says criticisms from east of the Nullarbor are invalid.
I think it's best for people who are outside WA to stop commenting on what we should do here in Western Australia. West Australians stand together, we look after each other, we look out for each other, and we should be making sure that we continue in that spirit of cooperation to help keep WA safe.
Yeah, keep the sandgropers safe from that one infection from a known source. So far not passed on to anybody else. Australia has done very well controlling coronavirus, there's no doubt about that. This success is supposed to allow us to operate better than most nations, but instead our pandemic of panic has us creating more pain for ourselves and treating people terribly. And people who resent this and want a sensible approach, outside of New South Wales, have no one speaking up for them. What a pity there's no vaccine for paranoia. And how about this as a demonstration for just how nutty all this can get? Around Perth at the moment, in the Perth Hills, they're fighting horrific bushfires. You've seen the coverage on this station today. It's a dangerous and life-threatening situation. Yet we learned late today that the firefighting effort in the West has been adjusted. Why? To minimise the risk of COVID transmission. Have a look at this.
We have restrictions on the number of firefighters in vehicles. You'll notice all firefighters are wearing masks and maintaining social distancing. With the driver in the front of an appliance, you'll see, and generally one or two in the back. So we're just trying to reduce the crowding of appliances.
Seriously, spreading out the firefighters because they're worried about COVID, because there's one person down in a city hospital with COVID. I would have thought fighting the fire with maximum resources would have been the highest priority. No more infections for the past 2 days, but ration your firefighters. This is not the practical, self-reliant, go-get-'em Australia that I've grown up to know.